The modern world has turned motion into a virtue and stillness into a weakness. That is one of the most expensive lies ever sold to intelligent people. You are told that if you are not replying, moving, posting, trading, meeting, reacting, building, networking, scrolling, optimizing, or chasing, then you are falling behind. You are trained to feel guilty in silence. You are taught to fear empty space. But I have watched enough lives unfold to know something most people learn too late. Frantic movement is often a mask for inner disorder. A man who cannot sit still is not always ambitious. He is often afraid of missing out, afraid of being left behind, afraid of hearing his own thoughts, afraid that if he stops moving, he will discover he has been running in circles. The ability to sit quietly in a room, alone with your mind, is one of the rarest and most valuable skills of this century. And because it is rare, it pays. The world tells you that success belongs to the fast, the loud, the aggressive, the endlessly active. There is some truth in speed, of course. There are moments when action matters. There are moments when delay is cowardice dressed as caution. But those moments are fewer than people think. Most lives are not damaged by moving too slowly at the right time. They are damaged by moving too quickly at the wrong time. People confuse impatience with decisiveness. They confuse nervous energy with intelligence. They confuse constant engagement with relevance. In markets, this destroys capital. In careers, it destroys judgment. In relationships, it destroys peace. In life, it destroys the ability to distinguish signal from noise. You do not need movement every hour. You need the right movement at the right time. And the price of knowing the difference is often stillness. I have spent a great deal of my life reading, thinking, waiting, and refusing to confuse activity with progress. To the restless eye, this can look like doing nothing. That is because shallow people only recognize visible labor. They understand sweat, not restraint. They understand meetings, not thinking. They understand the appearance of importance, not the substance of sound judgment. But a great deal of wealth, wisdom, and peace comes from things that do not photograph well. Sitting with a report and saying no. Watching a market panic and doing nothing. Listening in a conversation instead of rushing to perform intelligence. Refusing to buy what everyone wants. Refusing to speak when silence reveals more. Refusing to chase because you understand that most opportunities are not opportunities at all. They are bait. The deeper truth is uncomfortable. Most people are not exhausted because life asks too much of them. They are exhausted because they have lost the ability to be still. Their minds are like engines left running all night, burning fuel while going nowhere. They cannot endure boredom, so they consume stimulation. They cannot endure uncertainty, so they manufacture action. They cannot endure silence, so they fill it with noise. They cannot endure the slow pace of compounding, so they lunge for excitement. And because they cannot sit still, they become easy prey for the world. Advertisers prey on them. News cycles prey on them. Markets prey on them. Egos prey on them. Other people's urgency preys on them. A man who cannot sit quietly in a room is like a house with all the doors unlocked. Something will eventually walk in and take what matters. So let me give you 5 rules, not theories, not fashionable slogans, rules, hard laws of human behavior, money, and attention. If you understand them, you will see that doing nothing is not passivity. It is often discipline at its highest level. It is the refusal to leak force. It is the ability to hold your ground while the world burns calories, proving nothing. First, understand the central paradox. The people who look busiest are often the least in control. The modern person lives in a storm of reaction. Messages, feeds, opinions, alerts, headlines, meetings, trends, expectations. Every hour becomes a test of whether you can protect your own mind from colonization. That is what stillness really is. It is not merely sitting in a chair. It is sovereignty. It is the right to remain unhooked. It is the decision that not every signal deserves a response. Not every feeling deserves action. Not every opportunity deserves attention. and not every silence needs to be filled. If you do not own your attention, you do not own your life. You are merely a rented space where other people's priorities come to live. The rule of unspent motion. The first rule is this: energy not spent impulsively becomes strength. Most people imagine power as force in motion, but much of real power is force held in reserve. A disciplined man is not the one who can only act. It is the one who can refrain from acting until action is justified. The person who buys every dip, answers every message, comments on every development, joins every trend, and responds to every emotional fluctuation may look engaged, but he is often just leaking strength through every crack in his character. Most people fail here because they cannot tolerate the tension of waiting. Waiting makes them feel weak. It makes them feel irrelevant. It makes them feel as if life is happening somewhere else without them. So they act to relieve the discomfort. Not because the action is wise, but because action gives psychological relief. It gives the illusion of control. A trader clicks buy because silence feels unbearable. A manager calls another meeting because uncertainty makes him anxious. A lonely person enters the wrong relationship because emptiness feels heavier than risk. An investor over-diversifies because holding cash feels like doing nothing. The pattern is always the same. Motion becomes anesthesia. But unspent motion is not weakness. It is potential. Think of a loaded spring. The value is not in random bouncing. The value is in compression held until the right moment. Think of a hunter who fires every time he hears rustling in the bushes. Soon he has no ammunition left for the real target. Think of a battery. If it drains all day on trivial applications, it has nothing left when something vital appears. Life works the same way. People ruin themselves not only by large mistakes, but by 1,000 tiny expenditures of force on things that never mattered. The practical takeaway is simple and unpleasant, which is usually how truth arrives. The next time you feel the urge to act, pause and ask one question: am I moving because reality demands it, or because discomfort demands relief? Write that question down if you must. If you cannot answer clearly, do nothing. Let the discomfort sit in the room with you. You may find that half your so-called urgent decisions dissolve when deprived of emotional momentum. That is not laziness. That is discipline. The rule of surviving boredom. The second rule is this: the ability to endure boredom is a financial advantage. That sounds almost insulting in a culture obsessed with stimulation, but it is true. Markets reward patience far more than excitement. Good businesses are often boring to watch. Sound investing is often boring to practice. Building a reputation is boring. Reading annual reports is boring. Repeating a sound strategy for years is boring. Raising children well is boring in the most sacred way. Most things that compound are boring in the short term because compounding is quiet. It does not entertain you while it works. Most people fail because they need to feel something all the time. They need novelty, confirmation, acceleration, drama, and visible movement. They mistake boredom for deadness, when often boredom is simply the absence of cheap stimulation. That is a very different thing. The mind that has been fed noise every day begins to interpret silence as deprivation. So it reaches for content, gossip, purchases, trades, arguments, and plans. Not because these things are useful, but because they rescue the person from the plainness of ordinary time. And ordinary time is where wealth is actually built. I have seen investors destroy excellent positions because nothing was happening fast enough to satisfy them. I have seen professionals abandon strong paths because the middle years lacked glamour. I have seen marriages weaken because one or both people no longer knew how to live without constant emotional fireworks. That is what boredom intolerance does. It makes stable things feel insufficient. It convinces you that peace is emptiness, that repetition is death, that stillness is waste. Then it sends you wandering into storms in search of weather dramatic enough to make you feel alive again. Imagine a farmer who digs up the seed every 3 days because he is impatient to see growth. He calls this vigilance. In reality, he is murdering the harvest. Or imagine a man on a long bridge who keeps changing direction because the scenery has become dull. He mistakes motion for progress and ends the day exactly where he began. Boredom is often the toll you pay at the entrance to mastery. People who cannot pay that toll remain tourists in every part of life. Your assignment is to practice deliberate boredom. Sit in a room for 20 minutes with no device, no music, no task, no snack, no escape. Just you and your mind. Watch what happens. Notice how quickly the inner machinery starts begging for stimulation. That machinery controls more of your life than you think. If you cannot sit with yourself for 20 minutes, you are not free. You are being pulled around by a nervous system that has forgotten how to stand still. The rule of surviving boredom. The second rule is this: the ability to endure boredom is a financial advantage. That sounds almost insulting in a culture obsessed with stimulation, but it is true. Markets reward patience far more than excitement. Good businesses are often boring to watch. Sound investing is often boring to practice. Building a reputation is boring. Reading annual reports is boring. Repeating a sound strategy for years is boring. Raising children well is boring in the most sacred way. Most things that compound are boring in the short term because compounding is quiet. It does not entertain you while it works. Most people fail because they need to feel something all the time. They need novelty, confirmation, acceleration, drama, and visible movement. They mistake boredom for deadness, when often boredom is simply the absence of cheap stimulation. That is a very different thing. The mind that has been fed noise every day begins to interpret silence as deprivation. So it reaches for content, gossip, purchases, trades, arguments, and plans. Not because these things are useful, but because they rescue the person from the plainness of ordinary time. And ordinary time is where wealth is actually built. I have seen investors destroy excellent positions because nothing was happening fast enough to satisfy them. I have seen professionals abandon strong paths because the middle years lacked glamour. I have seen marriages weaken because one or both people no longer knew how to live without constant emotional fireworks. That is what boredom intolerance does. It makes stable things feel insufficient. It convinces you that peace is emptiness, that repetition is death, that stillness is waste. Then it sends you wandering into storms in search of weather dramatic enough to make you feel alive again. Imagine a farmer who digs up the seed every 3 days because he is impatient to see growth. He calls this vigilance. In reality, he is murdering the harvest. Or imagine a man on a long bridge who keeps changing direction because the scenery has become dull. He mistakes motion for progress and ends the day exactly where he began. Boredom is often the toll you pay at the entrance to mastery. People who cannot pay that toll remain tourists in every part of life. Your assignment is to practice deliberate boredom. Sit in a room for 20 minutes with no device, no music, no task, no snack, no escape. Just you and your mind. Watch what happens. Notice how quickly the inner machinery starts begging for stimulation. That machinery controls more of your life than you think. If you cannot sit with yourself for 20 minutes, you are not free. You are being pulled around by a nervous system that has forgotten how to stand still. The rule of silence as an information advantage. The third rule is this: silence reveals what noise hides. When you stop rushing to react, patterns become visible. In business, in markets, in people, in your own motives, silence gives you access to information that busyness keeps concealed. People speak too much because they are afraid of appearing uncertain. They trade too much because they are afraid of missing opportunity. They interfere too much because they are afraid of irrelevance. But silence is a magnifying glass. If you hold it long enough, things sharpen. Most people fail here because they have been trained to treat immediate response as intelligence. The fastest answer wins the room. The quickest opinion looks powerful. The confident interruption gets rewarded. But I have found that the first interpretation is very often the weakest one. When everyone reacts at once, they are usually reacting not to facts, but to emotional contagion. Markets do this. Offices do this. Families do this. Nations do this. One man panics, another copies him, and soon the room is on fire from borrowed fear. Silence interrupts contagion. It creates a gap between stimulus and response, and in that gap, judgment has a chance to enter. The person who can remain silent while others rush forward often sees what they do not. He sees who is insecure, who needs approval, who cannot tolerate uncertainty, who confuses confidence with competence, who is bluffing, who is selling, who is performing, who is genuinely thinking. Words reveal people, yes, but so does your refusal to add more words before you understand what is actually happening. I have sat in many rooms where the most useful thing I could do was keep my mouth shut, not because I had nothing to say, but because the room had not yet revealed enough. People tell you who they are when you give them space to fill. A reckless man will overpromise. An insecure man will decorate. A dishonest man will contradict himself. A desperate man will push too hard. A wise man can gather a great deal simply by refusing the vanity of immediate display. Think of a muddy pond. If you keep stirring it, you will never see the bottom. Silence is what lets the dirt settle. Once it settles, reality becomes visible. So the practical takeaway is this: delay your response in situations where speed is socially rewarded but not actually necessary. Let other people spend their emotional ammunition first. Listen longer than feels comfortable. Speak only when your words improve the quality of the room. In markets, wait before trading. In conflict, wait before replying. In negotiations, wait before filling the silence. Silence is not empty. It is often the place where the most expensive truths arrive. The rule of doing nothing while the crowd performs. The fourth rule is this: in a world addicted to performance, doing nothing is often a form of resistance. I do not mean indifference. I mean the refusal to participate in noise merely because noise is fashionable. Most people are not thinking as independently as they imagine. They are performing participation. They are commenting because others comment, buying because others buy, posting because others post, panicking because others panic, outraging because others outrage. This is not thought. It is social reflex. Most people fail here because they are hungry for belonging. That hunger is ancient, and it does not disappear just because you wear a suit or read financial statements. The fear of being left out can overpower logic. The fear of looking foolish can overpower patience. The fear of standing apart can overpower conviction. So people join the stampede. They buy at the top because everyone is celebrating. They sell at the bottom because everyone is bleeding. They overwork because everyone else is advertising exhaustion. They say yes to crowded calendars because no feels like disconnection. But the crowd is often most confident at the point of greatest danger. That is true in markets and in life. Euphoria is not proof. Consensus is not safety. Activity is not wisdom. If you cannot endure the loneliness of not participating, you will pay heavily for the comfort of joining in. The crowd gives emotional shelter and often takes financial flesh in return. Picture a storm at sea. The inexperienced sailor keeps adjusting every rope, turning every wheel, reacting to every wave, trying to prove effort. The experienced sailor knows that some storms are survived less by frantic correction than by keeping the vessel balanced and refusing foolish moves. That is what much of life requires. Not theatrical effort, but disciplined non-participation. Not proving you are active, but proving you are governed. The practical warning is straightforward. Whenever you feel social pressure to act, stop and name the pressure. Is this conviction, or is this contagion? Is this analysis, or is this performance? Is this my judgment, or merely my fear of being absent while others appear engaged? You must learn to stand apart without narrating it to yourself as weakness. Doing nothing while the crowd performs can feel humiliating in the short term. In the long term, it is often where sanity and capital are preserved. The rule of inner stillness as wealth. The fifth rule is the deepest one. If you cannot be still, you will never know what you actually think. And if you do not know what you think, You will spend your life renting convictions from the environment. That is not only a financial problem, it is an existential one. A man without inner stillness is easy to manipulate. A woman without inner stillness is easy to exhaust. They may be bright, energetic, competent, and admired, but their inner world remains vulnerable to every external current. Praise lifts them too high. Criticism knocks them off course. Opportunity seduces them. Fear drives them. Loneliness weakens them. They are rich in motion and poor in center. Most people fail here because stillness forces self-confrontation. If you sit quietly long enough, you will meet things you have avoided: envy, grief, vanity, regret, hunger for approval, loneliness, old resentment, fear of insignificance, fear of wasting your life. Noise protects you from this meeting. That is one reason people cling to it. It is not just entertainment, it is anesthesia. But a life built on anesthesia becomes brittle. The first real crisis exposes how little inner architecture was ever built. I have seen fortunes lost because the person holding them had no center. They had intelligence, but not stillness. They had ambition, but not groundedness. They had access, but not self-command. When stress arrived, or temptation arrived, or humiliation arrived, they reacted like a house built on sand. Stillness is what turns intelligence into judgment. It is what allows long-term thinking to survive short-term emotion. It is what lets you separate what matters from what merely disturbs. Think of a compass in a shaking hand. The compass may be perfectly designed, but if the hand never steadies, the reading is useless. Your mind is no different. You can have information, models, mentors, spreadsheets, systems, and endless advice. But if the instrument inside you is constantly rattling, you will misread reality. Inner stillness is not some soft luxury. It is structural. It is a load-bearing wall. Here is the practical assignment. Create a daily period of unbroken quiet, not productive quiet, not strategic quiet disguised as another optimization exercise. Actual quiet. No screens, no input, no content, no multitasking. Sit, walk, or read something serious. Let the mind stretch out. Let the surface agitation settle. Do this consistently enough and you will begin to notice something extraordinary. Many of the things that once felt urgent were merely loud. Many of the things that once frightened you lose force when not constantly fed. And some of the truths you most need cannot be heard at all until the noise goes away. Now let me say what all of this really points to. Doing nothing is not the absence of discipline. It is often the purest expression of it. The discipline to wait. The discipline to resist emotional spending. The discipline to survive boredom. The discipline to remain unperformed in a world obsessed with display. The discipline to hear your own mind beneath the machinery of the culture. When I sit still while others rush, it is not because I lack interest in life. It is because I know what reaction costs. I know what noise does to judgment. I know what unnecessary movement does to capital. I know how many people ruin good lives because they cannot endure an empty hour. There is also a moral dimension to this that people do not discuss enough. A restless person is hard to trust. Not because he is bad, but because he is unstable. He is too easy to seduce, too easy to scare, too easy to redirect. The same is true of institutions, leaders, partners, and investors. If a person cannot sit with reality without immediately reaching for action, then fear will own him in a crisis and vanity will own him in prosperity. Stillness is part of character. It is proof that your appetites do not have total command. It is evidence that you can bear reality without constantly rearranging it to soothe yourself. I have also noticed something else. The inability to do nothing often damages love as much as money. Many people cannot simply be present. They must fill the room, fill the silence, fill the day, fill the relationship with plans, fixes, distractions, commentary, and stimulation. But some of the deepest forms of trust are built in quiet. sitting beside someone without performance, listening without preparing your next line, sharing a life not built entirely on events. If you cannot bear stillness, you will turn even love into activity management. At the end of life, very few people regret not having refreshed the page more often, traded more often, checked the phone more often, chased more often, spoken more often, or proved their relevance more aggressively. What they regret is the inability to inhabit their own lives while they were living them. They regret how quickly they surrendered attention. They regret how much of their inner world was outsourced to noise. They regret how often they acted to escape discomfort instead of allowing discomfort to teach them. So here is the warning. If you cannot learn to do nothing, the world will keep giving you things to do until you no longer remember who you are when you stop. That is not productivity. That is possession. Your calendar will own you. Your devices will own you. The market will own you. Other people's urgency will own you. And all the while, you may appear active, informed, connected, and ambitious. But beneath it, your life will be losing coherence. The great advantage of stillness is not that it makes you look wise. It is that it returns you to yourself. It lets you see clearly enough to act rarely, but well. It teaches you that much of what appears necessary is merely noisy. It reminds you that restraint is often more profitable than effort, that patience is often more intelligent than speed, and that a calm mind can survive storms that drown a more energetic one. In the end, money matters, yes. Judgment matters, yes. But above both stands something even more fundamental, whether you can live from a place of center rather than reaction, whether you can keep your hand steady on the steering wheel while the road shakes, whether you can preserve your battery for what matters, whether you can hold silence long enough for truth to settle at the bottom of the pond, whether you can sit in a room with no audience, no stimulation, no applause, and still remain whole. Because what truly matters is not how often you moved. It is whether your movement meant anything. It is not how much noise surrounded your days. It is whether you built an inner life strong enough to resist it. It is not whether the world saw you doing something at every moment. It is whether you learned the rarer art of doing nothing without becoming empty, of waiting without becoming weak, of being still without losing force. That is not just financial wisdom. That is freedom. And freedom, in the end, is worth more than all the frantic motion people mistake for life.